It had been 6 months since Margaret's husband, Robert, packed his suitcase and left. The sound of the car pulling out of their driveway in rural Vermont still echoed in her mind some nights. After 30 years together, he said he needed space. What he really needed, she soon learned, was a new start with a younger woman from his office. Margaret was 58, still graceful, kind, and deeply loyal. She wasn't the type to lash out or beg. She just stood by the kitchen window that morning, watching snow fall over the porch steps, and whispered to herself, "You'll be fine. You always are." But being fine and feeling fine were two different things. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Even the grandfather clock seemed to tick louder in the empty rooms. She filled her days with gardening, volunteering, and trying not to think about how empty the bed felt at night. Then, one Thursday afternoon, the phone rang. It was Lily, Robert's daughter from his first marriage. "Margaret," she said gently, "I know things have been difficult, but my son Evan's looking for work before he starts graduate school. Maybe he could help you around the house. He's handy with repairs." Margaret hesitated. She remembered Evan as a boy running around their backyard summers ago, chasing fireflies. "He's 24 now," Lily said as if reading her thoughts. "Mature, thoughtful. It might be good for both of you." After a long pause, Margaret agreed. "All right. Tell him to come next week." When Evan arrived, the air outside was still heavy with the scent of spring rain. He stepped out of his old pickup truck carrying a box of tools and a hesitant smile. "Hi, Margaret," he said. His voice had deepened since she'd last seen him. She opened the screen door, smiling back. "Goodness, you've grown up. Come in." He walked into the house and looked around. "Still smells like cinnamon and lemon cleaner," he said. "Exactly like I remember." Margaret chuckled. Some habits don't change. Over coffee at the kitchen table, they caught up. He told her about his college years, how he'd studied architecture but wasn't sure it was the right path. "I need some time to think," he said. "Mom thought helping you might clear my head." Margaret nodded. "Well, I can always use help around here. The porch railing's loose and the roof over the shed leaks." He grinned. "I'll start tomorrow morning." The next few days fell into a rhythm. Margaret woke early to make breakfast pancakes or oatmeal, and Evan would appear, hair still damp from a shower, ready to work. He was polite, easy to talk to, and quietly funny. While he worked, Margaret often sat nearby reading or weeding the garden. Sometimes they'd share small conversations about books, about the weather, about how life can surprise you. Evan had a way of asking questions that made her think. One afternoon while fixing the fence, he asked, "Do you ever miss him?" Margaret looked up from her pruning shears. "Every day. But not the man he became, the one who left. I miss the one who stayed for years before that." Evan nodded. "I get that." He didn't pry further, and she appreciated that. That evening, it rained again. The roof creaked softly as thunder rolled in the distance. The power flickered once, then went out. Margaret lit a candle and found Evan sitting in the living room, tuning an old radio. "Looks like we're going old-fashioned tonight," he said, smiling. She laughed. "At least we have candles. I'll make tea." They sat on the couch sipping tea, the candlelight throwing warm shadows across the walls. Evan told stories from his road trips with friends, how they'd gotten lost in Colorado, how they'd slept under open skies in Arizona. Margaret listened, smiling. "You've seen more of the world at 24 than I did at 40, he shrugged. "You've built more than I ever have. This house, your garden, it's something." Her heart softened. For months, she'd felt invisible, like everything she built no longer mattered. But here was someone who noticed. When the power returned. The clock blinked 11:17 p.m. Margaret stood up. "We should both get some sleep. You've got a full day tomorrow." Evan nodded. "Good night, Margaret." As she walked upstairs, she felt something unfamiliar lightness. She realized it wasn't attraction, but warmth. Human warmth she hadn't felt in months. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains. Margaret was already in the kitchen when Evan came down. "Morning," he said, pouring himself coffee. She smiled. "Morning. You're up early." He shrugged. "Couldn't sleep. I was thinking about how to fix the shed door. It's off its hinges." I trust your judgment, she said. Later that day, he climbed the ladder to replace loose shingles. Margaret stood below, holding the base steady. The air was bright and full of birdsong. You really didn't have to help, he called down. I'm not standing here for you, she said playfully. I'm protecting my rose bushes. He laughed, the sound echoing across the yard. For a moment, Margaret realized how much joy that sound brought her. That evening, when the work was done, they sat on the porch steps with lemonade. Evan talked about his plans. Maybe I'll move to Chicago for grad school. Or maybe I'll stay close for a while. Mom worries if I go too far. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. Distance can teach you things you don't learn at home, but sometimes home teaches you things you can't learn anywhere else. He looked at her curiously. You sound like someone who knows that firsthand. I do, she said softly. Their eyes met briefly, not romantically, but with shared understanding to people from different generations, who knew the ache of change and the comfort of being seen. Days turned into weeks. The garden bloomed, the roof no longer leaked, and laughter slowly returned to the old house. Margaret found herself baking again muffins, pies, the kind of small joys she'd stopped allowing herself. One afternoon, she baked apple pie and left a slice for Evan on the counter with a note, "For all your hard work." When he came in from mowing the lawn, he smiled at the sight. You didn't have to, he said, holding the note. I wanted to, she replied. That night, Evan went to bed early, but Margaret stayed downstairs cleaning up. When she walked past the living room, she noticed the old photo album open on the coffee table, pictures of Robert, young and smiling beside her. Evan had probably been looking through it. She closed the cover gently, then sat down. The past felt far away now, but not bitterly so, just distant. Like a story told long ago. For the first time since Robert left, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt present. A week later, Lily called to check in. How's Evan doing over there? She asked. Margaret smiled. He's been wonderful. Fixed everything. Even got the garden lights working. Lily laughed. That sounds like him. He said you make the best coffee he's ever had. Margaret blushed slightly. He's just being kind. When she hung up, she found Evan in the garden, kneeling near the roses. You've done wonders here, she said. He looked up, smiling. It's your care that keeps them alive. Something in his tone made her pause, not romantic, not misplaced, just full of respect and gratitude. And in that moment, Margaret realized how healing simple companionship could be. That evening, a thunderstorm rolled in. The lights flickered again, and she found Evan by the window, watching the lightning. It's funny, he said. When I was a kid, storms used to scare me. Now, I kind of like them. They remind you that chaos can still be beautiful, she said. He nodded. Yeah, exactly that. They stood there a moment, listening to the rain. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore, was peaceful. Margaret turned to go upstairs. Good night, Evan. Good night, he replied softly as she climbed the stairs. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror older. Yes, but not defeated. Behind her, the storm rumbled like distant applause. For the first time in a long while, she smiled at herself. Something inside her had shifted, not because of Evan's presence, but because she'd finally allowed life to move again. Summer had begun to soften the edges of Vermont's long spring rains. The house looked alive again, flowers curling toward sunlight, curtains open, the scent of coffee drifting through every morning. Margaret found herself humming sometimes as she watered the plants or dusted the old piano. Evan stayed busy repairing the last of the porch steps. He worked with quiet focus, rarely wasting words, and Margaret appreciated that. They didn't need constant talk. They had a calm rhythm. He worked. She cooked. They shared short meals and longer silences that didn't feel lonely anymore. But one Saturday morning, a small tension crept in. Evan was at the sink, rinsing tools, when he asked, "Do you think you'll ever talk to Robert again?" The question startled her. She turned from the window. No, there's nothing left to say. He nodded slowly. Sometimes people change too late, I guess. Margaret wiped her hands on a towel. Or sometimes they change because they never really wanted to stay. He didn't reply, just nodded, but his expression lingered in her mind long after he went outside. She realized she'd been speaking like someone who'd accepted loss, not fought it. That night, lying awake, she wondered when acceptance had turned into quiet surrender. The next week, Evan got a call from a university in Chicago. "They want me for an interview," he told her, excitement in his voice. "It's not a full acceptance yet, but it's close." Margaret smiled. "That's wonderful, Evan." He grinned. "Yeah, it feels good. But I'll miss this place, honestly." She didn't expect to feel a pinch of sadness at his words. "You'll do great," she said softly. "And the house will always be here if you ever visit." Over the next few days, she noticed herself watching him more closely nod, out of longing, but gratitude. He had brought life back to the rooms Robert had emptied. The kitchen laughter. The small conversations they had reminded her what simple companionship could do. The morning before his trip, they went to the farmer's market together. The town was buzzing with locals, vendors calling out prices, the air rich with baked bread and strawberries. Evan pointed out a stand of handmade wind chimes. "That one sounds like rain," he said, gently tapping one of the bells. Margaret smiled. "You have an ear for things most people ignore." He shrugged. "I think you taught me that. Do you notice small things too?" She looked at him, realizing it was true. She had started seeing beauty again in chipped teacups, in morning sunlight, in second chances. When they returned home, Evan packed his small suitcase. "It's just a week," he said. "I'll be back before you know it." Margaret nodded, helping him zip the bag. "Don't worry about the house. I'll manage." He laughed. "I'm more worried about the rose bushes." When his truck pulled away, the road stretched quiet again, the sound of gravel fading into the distance. Margaret stood on the porch long after he was gone, listening to the silence. That night, she set 2 plates at the dinner table before realizing she only needed 1. She smiled sadly, put one back, and whispered, "Old habits." Days passed slowly. Without Evan, the house felt larger. She spent evenings reading on the porch, waiting for updates. Sometimes her phone buzzed with a message. "Interview went well," or "Chicago's beautiful but loud." Each text made her heart lighter. But then the messages stopped for 2 days. Margaret tried not to worry, but the quiet pressed on her chest. Finally, one evening, her phone lit up. "Got in. They accepted me. I'll tell you everything when I'm back." Margaret smiled through tears. She typed, "I'm proud of you, Evan." He replied, "Wouldn't have done it without your coffee and advice." She laughed softly to herself. It was strange how simple words could fill an empty house. Evan returned that weekend, the air buzzing with summer heat. Margaret met him at the door with lemonade. "So," she asked. "I'm moving to Chicago in 3 weeks," he said. His voice carried both excitement and hesitation. "That's wonderful," she said, forcing a bright smile. "Truly." He looked around the kitchen. "It's going to feel strange leaving this place." "You'll build something new there," she said gently. "It's what life is, for a building." He studied her face as if memorizing it. "You say that like someone who's done it a few times." She laughed softly. "Maybe once or twice." The room grew quiet, filled with the sound of cicadas outside. Margaret changed the subject. "You should tell your mom the news. She'll be thrilled." Evan nodded but didn't move right away. "Yeah, I will." That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching moonlight spill across the garden. She thought about her life before all this, the years with Robert, the predictable dinners, the quiet nights. She had spent decades building security, but not much joy. Evan's arrival had reminded her what laughter felt like, what curiosity sounded like. But he was young, with a life waiting beyond these hills. She didn't want to be another weight holding him down. The next morning, she went out early to prune the roses. When Evan came outside, coffee in hand, he said, "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," she said, smiling. "Too much energy." He chuckled. "That's rare for you. They worked quietly, side by side. Margaret wanted to tell him how proud she was, how much he had helped her heal, but the words stayed lodged in her throat. A few days later, Lily visited. "He told me about the move," she said. "You must be proud." Margaret nodded. "I am." Lily looked around. "He really did wonders here. The place feels lighter." "Yes," Margaret said softly. "He brought back something I'd lost." Lily smiled kindly. "He has that effect on people. He sees the good in everything." When Lily left, Margaret stood in the doorway for a long moment. The truth was simple. Levin had reminded her how to live again. That was all. No confusion, no boundary crossed, just human healing in its quietest form. 2 weeks before Evan's move, the weather turned hot. They decided to fix the old attic fan together. The attic was dusty, filled with boxes and echoes of forgotten years. Evan sneezed. "I think this place has more history than some museums." Margaret laughed. "Be careful up there." While he worked, she opened an old trunk filled with photographs' weddings. Birthdays. A young Robert smiling proudly beside her. She felt a pang but not bitterness, just gratitude for what had once been. Evan climbed down the ladder. "It's fixed." He noticed the photos in her hand. "You look happy there?" "I was," she said. "Different time." He hesitated. "You still look happy sometimes. Like when you talk about the garden." She smiled faintly. "That's because plants don't leave." He frowned slightly, unsure if she was joking. But she smiled to show she was fine. Later that evening, they sat outside as the sky turned orange. "When do you leave?" she asked quietly. "Next Friday, so soon." He nodded. "I'll miss this place. It feels more like home than home does." "Then take a little of it with you," she said, handing him a small potted rose cutting. "From my garden to yours." He looked touched. "Thank you, Margaret, for everything." She smiled softly. "Don't thank me. You brought the sunlight back here." They sat in silence for a while, the air full of crickets and unspoken words. The week passed faster than she wanted. On his last day, the house was spotless, every project finished. Evan packed his tools into the truck. Margaret brought him a thermos of coffee and a paper bag with muffins. "For the road," she said. He grinned. "You know, you might have spoiled me for city life." "I doubt that," she said warmly. "You'll do fine." He hesitated, then said quietly, "You know, when I came here, I thought I was just helping fix things. But you fixed something in me, too." Margaret blinked back sudden tears. "I think we both did that for each other." He nodded slowly, as if the truth of that settled somewhere deep. When he finally drove away, she stood on the porch, waving until the truck disappeared. The silence that followed felt different, this time peaceful, not lonely. That night she walked through the house. It was still, but not empty. Everywhere she looked, fresh paint on the porch, repaired shelves. The small rose cutting missing from the window there were signs of change. She poured herself tea and sat by the window, whispering, "Thank you, Evan." Not for staying, but for reminding her that life still moved, still grew, even after heartbreak. Outside, their garden lights glowed softly in the dark. She smiled, feeling content for the first time in years. Some connections weren't meant to last forever. They existed to awaken something long asleep. Autumn returned to Vermont with its familiar crisp air and red leaves painting the hills. It had been 6 months since Evan left for Chicago. The house was quiet again, but not empty. Margaret had filled her days with gardening, book clubs, and early morning walks. She smiled more easily now. Sometimes, when the wind rattled the windows, she would glance toward the porch, half expecting to see him fixing something, his sleeves rolled up, his quiet concentration steadying the whole world. But he was gone, living his own life, and that was how it was meant to be. One late afternoon, as Margaret sorted mail at the kitchen counter, she noticed an envelope with unfamiliar handwriting. Chicago postmark. Her heart gave a small, surprised beat. She opened it carefully. "Dear Margaret, I hope the garden's still winning its fight against the frost. The city's busier than I imagined, but I'm doing well. I started working part-time at a museum and studying architecture. You were right. Sometimes rebuilding begins when you least expect it. I wanted you to know that your words, your patience, and your stories still guide me here. I'm grateful. Evan Margaret sat down slowly. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed those words. She smiled, folded the letter neatly, and placed it in her old music box, the same one that once held her wedding ring. That night, she stepped outside and looked at the stars. The wind was sharp, but peaceful. She whispered softly, "He's doing fine." Weeks passed and more letters came. Not often, just enough to fill the quiet. Evan wrote about classes, his small apartment, the people he met. He described the city lights and how they reminded him of the porch lantern they used to fix together. Margaret replied every few weeks, writing about her garden, the neighbors, and how the house had become her friend again. It wasn't romance. It was connection, pure and human. They both knew that some relationships were not meant to last forever, but still shaped everything that came after. One snowy morning, she received another letter, but this one was different. "Margaret, I met someone. Her name is Claire. She's kind and she listens the way you do. I wanted you to know because I think you'd like her. I hope that's okay." Margaret read the words twice. A soft ache moved through her chest, but it wasn't sadness. It was peace. She smiled, closed the letter, and whispered, "Good for you, Evan." Okay. She went outside to brush snow off the porch railings, her breath misting in the cold. She looked up at the sky and felt something deep, pride, warmth, and gratitude that she had been part of someone's healing journey. That spring, Lily visited again. "You look happy, Mom," she said, stirring sugar into her tea. "I am," Margaret replied. "Peaceful, finally." Lily glanced around the cozy kitchen. "You've done a lot with this place. Can't help me remember who I was," Margaret said with a smile. "For a long time, I thought life stopped when your heart breaks. But sometimes, it just starts breathing differently." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "You sound like someone who's made peace with the past." "I think I have," Margaret said. Later, after Lily left, Margaret walked to the garden and knelt by the rose bushes Evan had helped her plant. New buds had begun to bloom. She touched one gently, thinking, everything grows if you just give it time. Months rolled into a year. Evan's letters came less frequently, but that was natural. He was living fully now, chasing dreams and new beginnings. Margaret never felt abandoned. She felt fulfilled. On his birthday, she sent a simple postcard, "Keep growing. Evan, the world needs builders, not just of walls, but of hearts." 2 years later, she received a small parcel in the mail. Inside was a framed photograph, Evan standing beside a young woman with bright eyes and a calm smile. Behind them was a building site, scaffolding rising high. "We're engaged," the note read. "I wanted you to be the first to know. Thank you for believing in me when I see OULDN single quotes." Margaret held the photo for a long moment, her fingers trembling slightly. Tears gathered, but they were the kind that came with warmth, not sorrow. "He's found his future," she whispered, that night. She placed the photograph on the shelf beside her family pictures, not out of longing, but pride. The following summer, Margaret received another letter, this time an invitation. "Claire and I are getting married in August. It would mean a lot if you came." She hesitated at first. Chicago was far and her health wasn't what it used to be. But something inside urged her to go. She hadn't traveled in years. But this felt important. So one early morning, she packed a small suitcase, put on her best blue dress, and boarded a train bound west as the train rolled through fields and small towns. She gazed out the window, memories flooding back, laughter on the porch, the sound of rain, conversations that healed old wounds. By the time she reached Chicago, she felt ready for whatever waited. The wedding was simple and beautiful, held in a small garden surrounded by white roses. When Evan saw her among the guests, his face lit up. "Margaret," he said, rushing over to hug her. "You didn't think I'd miss it, did you?" She laughed. He grinned. "You came all this way. I wouldn't have missed it for the world." Claire, the bride, joined them with a warm smile. "You must be Margaret. Evans told me so much about you." Margaret smiled, her eyes kind. "I've heard beautiful things about you too." As the ceremony began, Margaret sat quietly, watching as vows were exchanged under the golden light. She thought about all the chapters of her life, the love she'd lost, the pain she'd survived, and the peace she'd finally earned. When the couple kissed, she clapped softly, whispering, "He's home." After the reception, Evan found her sitting by a small fountain. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You already did," she replied. "By living fully," he smiled, eyes shining. "I wouldn't be here without you." Margaret shook her head. "You would have found your way. I just gave you a little light when it got dark." He hesitated, then said, "I still keep the rose cutting. It's growing." She smiled. "Of course it is." Before leaving, Evan hugged her tightly. "You'll always have a place in my story," he said, "and you in mine." She replied softly. That evening, Margaret walked back to her hotel room alone. The city lights shimmered like stars brought to earth. She sat by the window, feeling both full and light. Life had come full circle. She had given love again, not the kind that binds, but the kind that frees. When she returned home to Vermont, she went straight to her garden. The roses were in bloom again, bright and full of life. She smiled, feeling the wind brush against her face. Whispering something like gratitude, Margaret picked one rose, placed it in a small vase, and set it by the window beside Evan's wedding photo. She looked out at the sunset and whispered, "We all find our way, don't we?" Her heart, once heavy with memories, now felt open. It's peaceful. For the first time in years, she felt that every ending truly did hold a quiet beginning.